All right, it's story time. I want to go over the time that I first considered negative suggestion to be a powerful force and motivator. For those of you not familiar, negative suggestion is the idea that you can get somebody to do something by telling them not to do it. And this is seen quite often in children, where the fastest way for you to get them to do something is to tell them not to do it. But it also works in many adults. Master magician and illusionist Darren Brown had made a TV special on it where he got a lady to seemingly kill a kitten, which wasn't harmed, by the way, but she thought it would be if she pressed the button that Darren Brown told her not to. And so negative suggestion is one of these polarity-based ways of influencing people because we as people are hardwired to not like being told what we can and cannot do. There are people who would do things just because they were told not to do it, or not do something because they were told to do it. It can go either way. But I was fascinated by the concept of it. And the first time I purposefully tried this out was back in the early 90s, which was a fantastic time, by the way. The late 80s, early 90s, if I had a time machine, that's where I would go. Just in that pocket of awkward transition between hair metal and grunge. Those were the best days. But I digress and I don't want to get too far off track. Back then I was working 3 jobs at once without a car. I walked to 2 of them and I took the bus to the 3rd. In the mornings I worked at a breakfast pancake house, which is not one of the major chains. And then in the evenings, I would alternate working at a hospital and a pizza place. And it was the first Papa John's franchise in the entire area. But this story has nothing to do with those evening jobs. It has to do with the first one, the pancake house. Now, when I started at the breakfast place, I started as a dishwasher, but then was moved and trained as a line cook, to where on weekdays I was running the kitchen pretty much by myself back there. The weekends would be a bit busier, and then they would have more people working back there. Now, the toughest part of being trained to be a line cook in a pancake house is the number of eggs you're going to break and go through until you get it right. I went through dozens of eggs because you're not allowed to just take a spatula and flip eggs. You have to learn to flip them in the pan without breaking them. It's a very, very specific movement with the wrist, and until you get it down with muscle memory, you are going to break all kinds of eggs. I had a buddy who's since passed on. He's done some of the drumming and guitar work on a few of the songs that are on my channel from that era. And he started working at Denny's as a line cook. And I asked him, I said, how many eggs you go through? He said, oh, a lot. And it's a lot of pressure because people are waiting on their food. You got the rest of their food done and you keep breaking their eggs over and over again, having to start over. It can get a bit nerve-wracking. But eventually you do get it down. And I still flip eggs that way to this day. I still have my tiny little skillet pan that is specifically for eggs. Because once you've been trained to do that, you don't go back. What does this have to do with the story? Absolutely nothing. I digressed once again. I guess the point was that some of the things that I learned at this place are still with me today. You know, certain ways to do things. But I remember it was a weekend on this particular day because it was busier. There were more people back there. It wasn't just me by myself. And one of my coworkers had come in and he was really, really hungover. Now, he was a bit younger than me, and I think he must have been part Indian. He wasn't white, but he wasn't really dark either. He was a light caramel brown. And this one Sunday, he comes in just really hungover. He wasn't looking great. He was looking pretty rough. He must have tied one on really good last night. And seeing the shape that he was in and being the jerk that I was back then, I went up to him and asked him how he was doing. You don't look so good. What's going on? You all right? He's like, no, I'm not feeling well at all. He said he was majorly hungover. And then that's when I saw my opportunity to test the negative suggestion. And so I said to him, well, I'm sorry to hear that. We don't want you getting any worse. So whatever you do, don't look at the gravy. And I walked off. And I left that negative suggestion just turning in his head. Don't look at the gravy. Now, everybody knows what the biscuit gravy looks like. It's that white gravy with the chunks of sausage sticking out of it. It's one of those foods that tastes so good, but yet looks so nasty and unappealing. And so now, this poor guy who is already fighting this urge to hurl is now having this inner struggle of trying not to look at the gravy. But, I got to get back to work. We're really busy. So I'm cooking and getting orders out. And it was about 10 minutes later, they hear this. I'm not even doing it justice. It was way louder than that. And it was right around the corner. I see him bent over in the custodial wash basin. It's one of these commercial sinks that we use to fill up the mop bucket and whatnot. But they're really, really deep, all stainless. Well, he was bent over that, just puking his guts out. And I was just cracking up. And then after he finished, I went up and asked him, I said, what happened? And he said, I looked at the gravy, which made me laugh even harder. I said, I told you not to do that. And he said, I couldn't help it. I just couldn't help it. And then he called me an a-hole. He wasn't mad about it, but he wasn't stupid. He knew from the way I was laughing that I set that whole thing up to get him to look at the gravy by telling him not to look at the gravy. And that's the gravy story. And my first purposeful experiment at negative suggestion, which, as you just heard, was a resounding success. So have fun trying out your own negative suggestion experiments. Now, over time, I've learned that it's more useful to be subtle than to be openly overt with it, because if people know what you're trying to do, then they won't do it. It's almost another form of negative suggestion in of itself. Well, I know they're trying to get me to do this, so I'm not going to do it. People don't like being told what to do, and we're hardwired to rebel against that. In fact, having a job is doing what you're told in exchange for pay. But if you tell someone not to do what you want them to do, you can sometimes use that to your advantage. This is Frater Xavier, and I will see you next time. Take care.